You are not yet live, so I can still go off a bit.
We actually have 3 minutes and you are already live. So just no, you can't. We are live already.
Okay. Well, yeah, I was just gonna switch off the video. Okay, that's fine.
Switch it off. Switch it off.
You'll let me know when I should put it on.
Okay. Hello. Let's see. I will. Hey, Doc.
Okay.
I just hope I won't have some trouble. There's some echo that I'm getting this side, but we'll try and go through with it. On your side, there won't be any echo, but on my side, there's a bit of echo.
Okay.
All right. So,
And I think there's a delayed sound from my side to yours.
no, yours is good.
Okay.
So I'll let you do most of the talking so that my echo doesn't. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Joining us via multiple social media platforms. My name is Dr. Fundile Nyati. Today, I've got a special guest, Dr. Palisa Sekejane. All right, Dr. Palisa Sekejane has got a doctoral degree in health sciences from the University of Johannesburg. She is a biomedical technologist who specializes in biophotonics, which is the application of laser to disease models. She is currently a research specialist at the Africa Institute of South Africa within the Human Sciences Research Council. Her current interests are bioeconomy policy, biosciences, biomedical innovations and technology. She's also a research associate at the University of Johannesburg in the Applied Sciences Research Unit. She has also participated at the launch of the Next Einstein Forum in Senegal. She's been awarded for advancing science and innovation-led Africa societies. She was one of the young scientists representing South Africa at the BRICS Young Scientists Forum. Dr. Sekejane, welcome to Dr. Fundi platform.
Thank you. Good evening to the participants at the platform. Good evening to you. Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm looking forward to my chat with you.
Okay, awesome.
Right. Let me get straight to why we are here today. Today, there was an article that came out on the Cape Times, which you penned, something about Africa has to collaborate, or Africans have to collaborate and come up with vaccines that are actually talking to the infections or diseases that are prevalent in this continent. We seem to be quite dependent on what is done by other people in other continents. And where we collaborate with people who are from outside of the continent. So I want us to talk about that article. But before we do so, what I want to know is what actually made you to start writing this article?
This article comes as a result of, you know, a number of issues even before COVID-19 hit us. When we were, if you remember, is it 2018, when we held the BRICS Summit in South Africa, Johannesburg, we were the host as South Africans. One of the agreements there was to develop the pharmaceutical industry or the vaccine development capacity, and also to make sure that we can build the public health system. And I mean, vaccines really form a great part of the public health system. Public health system, as you may know, that it's made up of about 6 pillars, and capacity and vaccine manufacturing or essential drugs is very much part of it. So, and then I went on to check, given that we have the support from the BRICS to work on that, what is happening on our ground. And to a little bit of my disappointment after that, we, as I've mentioned also on the article, that we are fortunate that we have BioVac that is a part of the vaccines manufacturing network in the world, from the developing countries, actually, not in the world. So there are organizations or companies that are part of that network. We'll come back to it later. And then I realized that it had partnered with one of the known pharmaceutical companies, which are also, that company is also present here in South Africa. Not that it's much of an issue, but my issue was that I had hoped that BioVac would probably try and partner up with one of the BRICS pharmaceutical companies, so that they can advance and that mandate. They can try and make sure that we can identify some of the challenges that can lead up to manufacturing of essential medicines and vaccines. So essentially trying to meet up the objectives of that agreement.
All right. So, all right. Now, I get that context. Now, before we get again to the article itself, there's a lot that is happening out there. There is actually a global movement that is anti-vaccines, and we are talking vaccines. So what's your view to this global movement that is discouraging people from actually making use of vaccines?
Yes, I became aware of this movement about 2 years as well ago. And it seems like it's been long coming, but then nothing of what they claim from the vaccines to be valid. They claim that vaccines have a potential to cause some iatrogenic outcomes. And in fact, it has not been valid. I mean, like, it's possible, but I have not, in my research capacity and portfolio, I have not come across a valid uh, outcomes that vaccines have caused certain outcomes. Of course, it's possible if that might happen at the trial level, because when one is participating at the trials, it's a give and take. Of course, they must be safe, but then we never know of what might be out of control without, I mean, that is not anticipated by those who are running the clinical trials. So in my personal opinion or view, I am not in support of being anti-vaccine utilization, taking of the vaccines. I mean, and I know that even most of the developing countries, they may want to say, look, we want to cure things in a particular way. Yes, we do acknowledge the use of indigenous medicines and knowledge and so on. But where also we do not have sufficient knowledge or satisfying information and findings about certain products, also we cannot claim that we can't use vaccines, because remember, vaccines, they are just there to assist our bodies to make sure that they do not find it difficult to cope with extrinsic factors or external factors that may cause our immune systems to react otherwise.
Yes. So how important, as we are now battling with the issue of COVID-19, how important is, is for Africa to actually develop its own vaccines?
It's quite critical. It's quite critical because I think in as much as I did not articulate to the dot as far as how much it would cost to develop a vaccine, but I think just that stimulus package from the president of 500 billion, that's what we would need as a country to put into that pocket. So it's very expensive. It's not an exercise that requires one, particularly for us. I mean, like, some of these countries, they have built that industry over the years, but now for us, we still struggling to even develop capacity for good manufacturing practices, good clinical practices. The last time I checked, we are conducting clinical trials in the country, but we do not have registered clinical trials. So that for us, it tells us developmental wise, we still have a way to go. And in the continent as well, there are about 7 organizations that have that pre-qualification to manufacture vaccines. Of course, pre-qualification does not mean what you're going to produce now, it already qualifies. So it means you do have the capacity, you have demonstrated that you do have a capacity to manufacture, you do have some infrastructure to manufacture. So if you do come up with a product, it will qualify for testing, for trialing, and so on. So we have those 7 organizations are in Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, South Africa, Ethiopia, I think Sudan as well. But for me, the issue as well, as far as I'm now talking continental strategy, is that these are organizations that are, is it private-public PPP, So these are the kinds of organizations that hold that kind of preclinical. But as far as making sure that we can mobilize those continental strategies, these organizations, they are working at the country level. They are not working at the continental level.
Yes.
So now that makes it very difficult. It's a constraint on its own, that it means they will require a lot of money. They will take longer to produce some vaccines.
Yes.
BioVac, for instance, it was supposed to have already produced one of its first vaccines by 2013. So we're going for like almost second decade when they're still behind, but now they do have some products that are out there.
Yeah. So around late March, beginning of April, there were those two doctors from France who were caught, talking about developing a vaccine for COVID and testing it, in Africa. And there was a lot of people who were upset in the continent about, it being used, to test stuff that was done elsewhere. Africans being used as guinea pigs. Your view about that?
It's very wrong to say that it can be tested here, but also I do understand where they're coming from. And I'm not saying I understand where they're coming from in support. I understand where they're coming from in a sense that that is what they know. They are used to having product. They know that we are vulnerable. We do not have the capacity. We do not have the interest to manufacture vaccines. So what would be the testing ground? It would be us, the most vulnerable, because the excuse would be that to avoid Africans from dying, let's spare Africans from the disease because Africa is burdened with disease. Hey, we don't have functioning health systems and so on. So now, we end up becoming like scapegoats or some yelping dogs that are just excited to receive this candy because we want to save ourselves. So I am not in support of that approach. And for me, it signaled a dire need for the continent to make sure that we can work within our regional blocks to make sure that we support vaccine development infrastructure. And it does not even have to be a biological product in itself. We can even start by just putting financial mechanisms that can aid that process. So I like the Ethiopians' strategy when they realized that they're only having fewer players in the market. They started approaching the banks to say they must finance about 70% of a startup capital towards vaccine manufacturing. So now I don't know how we are doing it in South Africa. I've not seen it in that fashion in terms of how would I get funding to finance it. So it remains much a blue sky research, which is either in the research councils or in the universities, but then there is no planning in terms of how do we support these products to be in the pipeline.
So in your article, let's get to the article now. So when you sat down and you did your, research and, to write this article, what was the main objective that you had in mind?
So the main objective that I had in mind was to awaken us as a research community, as yourselves, healthcare workers, as entrepreneurs, to say, look, we are having issues that I think at this point in time, most of Africans are literate, although it may not be to a point that we desire, but we at least literate enough to say we want development to go our way. And also, what even made it worse for me when I was penning it. So the first objective was to say, look, we do have the capacity. We are not making use of it. Secondly, for how long are we going to sit on that capacity and not making use of it? Thirdly, all those products and researches that we conduct in our own councils, universities, and so on in our institutions, it's a wake-up call for us to not want to do these things as a matter of key performance achievements or whatever they call them. But then it's a matter of now thinking country-wise and thinking continental-wise. What is in it for us? And particularly also because most of us Africans, we always talk about how we are passive consumers, so we need to get rid of that status. And this is one opportunity that we need to make sure of. And also it's quite absurding that even when you read the reports from McKinsey about the pharmaceutical industry, where to invest, I mean, Africa is a place to invest simply because it's a non-factor that we will consume.
Yes.
We will consume. So now my objective is that we should not only be consumers. We do not have a high rate of employment. That could be a point of departure also in terms of the African free trade, continental free trade agreement, so that we can start trading amongst ourselves with our capacity. We can trade with ideas as well that can be of solution to the continent. So it need not be something that we hold on to. So we need to actually also consider changing models in terms of how do biological or biological products benefit us, or research benefits us, particularly as far as these products that are essential, vaccines are essential. So now we need to consider some of the models in terms of, are we going to have an institution X developing a particular ingredient, and that ingredient must fit into a national system that can be part of a regional block, and then a particular. So we need to come up with how we can make use of our concoction.
Yes. Now, in the article, you started by highlighting that about 69% of the disease burden is from infectious diseases, if we look at the continent as a whole. Yet, we actually not making any impact in terms of developing and manufacturing the vaccines. And then you went and compared us to India. Can you tell us what is it? What are the insights that you picked up when you compared Africa to India and other BRICS countries?
Yes. So for instance, so for instance, I mean, like, I think you may have come across. I just struggle to pronounce that name. It's Institute Bitantant. And your listeners, please pardon me if I'm really calling it wrongly. So with India, for instance, they're already working with the universities. So a particular student in a university X will come up with an enzyme, for example, or an antigen. So that antigen, once it's been purified or tested, it will be traded off with a particular pharmaceutical industry, so that they can incorporate it in their concoction of a vaccine or a drug. And then as a result, the sales that come out of there, they go to fund the research within that university.
Yes.
That's point number one. So now it's a clear collaboration in the country. So now, as a result as well, how India it has done it, it has made sure that the national stock of vaccines or medicines that are being produced or manufactured, they have a national interest at first. So everything that was being produced about 4 decades ago in India, it was in the interest of serving Indians. But now that, of course, has changed. We see so many Indian companies. The Cipla is one of them. So they have made sure that they collaborate with universities, so that universities can also create some form of funding for themselves. And it's a very vibrant space. They're even, last year when I was in Brazil with them, they're even feeling like, oops, you know what? Because this has become so much of a practice, and we are also.
Because I was about to ask you to say, what is the picture in Brazil?
Brazil also, it's one of the good models. It's not bad. I mean, like, they're struggling, but I think they're doing far much better, because with Brazil also, what they started doing, they traded off some of their IPs with established pharmaceutical industries, and in exchange for training. So they would get into an agreement to say, Fundile must train particular number of students, and eventually we built an industry in that fashion. So it was a very much concerted effort. So it was not about students obtaining knowledge and then they must fend off for themselves as well. So it was a very much a concerted effort, and of which I think in South Africa we need to start doing that. I see that and oftentimes you'll find that there are short courses. I mean, like, when I looked at one of the documents that showed what is happening as far as developing a vaccine cadre, it's short courses, and then people go back to their working spaces, and so it is not targeted. It is not used in such a way that it will feed into a particular block of development within our health system, and of which I find it's a problem.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Okay. So, and then about Cuba, what insights did you pick up when you looked at Cuba in relation to vaccine development?
Yes. You know, actually with Cuba, I did not even do much of research, but then when I saw their the cohort that has been brought to South Africa, I mean, it was a shock for me. Not that I expected little from the Cubans themselves, but then you saw in the beginning of this mayhem in South Africa, when people were starting to talk about the nuclear factor serums and so on. And Cuba was very much in the feature that, oh no, we're going to get some NF kappa from Cuba and so on and on. So Cuba, it has done well in terms of it is inward looking as far as vaccine development is concerned. They're building their own capacity. As you saw, they brought a serious contingent with themselves. South Africa brought a serious contingent here. So now with India as well, it is a national mandate to be working on these biological essentials or vaccines or so on. And another thing that I think I should have also mentioned earlier, these countries, they have serum institutes. We don't have serum institutes. Those serum institutes, they become important. You had that what is this the blood transfusion company. They're looking at now extracting some of the serums of those who have recovered from COVID, so that they can use the antibodies and so on. Now that is very much important, to be having serums that you can extract some immunobiological factors from, so that they can be stored, because oftentimes when we get sick from a particular infection, immune system gets awakened by those external factors. And immune system, you know, we know that there are those factors that will always be working to combat the infections and so on, and oftentimes they're common, you know. So that's another thing that we need to look into as far as developing our vaccine chain.
Now, then you mentioned something about Ethiopia and the collaborations that Ethiopia was making with Middle East countries, you know, India, China, but not much collaboration with other African countries.
Definitely. I mean, the same as with us, South Africa. I don't know if we are collaborating with any African country as far as vaccine development is concerned, you know. We are collaborating with Sweden or Switzerland, one of the two, you know, so we are not collaborating. So the intra-African collaboration in as far as that manufacturing of vaccines or essential medicines, it's quite low. It's only Sudan, and I mean, as Sudan, I've not seen Sudan having a pre-qualification. So, but it does not mean that Sudan needs a pre-qualification. It may be that Sudan is providing some elements within that vaccine development chain. And it's also of note, and now this is the point that I just want to make to your viewers, that when we're talking also vaccine development, you saw probably yesterday or 2 days ago, America, although it does not have a vaccine at this point in time, but they are already having companies that will be producing vials. There's a company that has already won a tender to provide vials for containing the vaccines. So we can play a role in that chain, even though we don't come up with the active ingredients of a pharmaceutical product, but then at least be part of the chain, because other than that, all that chain, we lose out from it.
Because about 2 weeks ago, there was some researchers from China who actually were the first ones to have what they call phase 1, you know, vaccine against COVID-19, and it was quite promising, but obviously they still need to go through other phases, you know. And these are countries that are with us within BRICS, and I think there could be collaborations there as well, you know, from the BRICS nations. But yes, the key point though in your article was about Africa. Now, let's then look at what are the impediments? What are the things that are making African countries not to join forces, either as regional blocs or as a continent as a whole? What have you found to be the challenges?
So one of the challenges that became very much apparent was there is no desire. There is no desire to develop or manufacture vaccines. And this is coming from the government officials from certain countries. There is less interest. And also they just feel like, well, if it must be developed, there must be some external funding that comes with that. Now, of course, that poses a challenge because somebody who comes with external funding will say, I have my own capacity. Yes, you know, so of course, now we end up not being on an equal scale. So for me, the number one bottleneck is lack of interest to want to develop or manufacture vaccines. That is that is a number one concern. Secondly, I don't think, you know, let's look at South Africa, for example. South Africa has been struggling to get past the 1% contribution of GDP towards research and development. And the major contributor of the towards the R&D expenditure, it's the private sector, you know? So that also tells us that as much as we want to consume research, we want to conduct research, but then the research is more important to the private sector than it is to government. You know, of course it is important to the government, but then as far as funding is concerned and making sure that we drive it, it's a little bit of a challenge. So now, and I can't tell you that we don't have more than 5 countries that I can think of out of my top of my head that are contributing more than 0.8% of the GDP towards R&D. So now contribution towards research and development also, it's a struggle in the continent. So although we have those strategies at the continent level, lubricating the intra-African collaboration, it's a challenge finance-wise. So we need to make sure that we can try and find a buy-in of investing in that. But also it is of interest that we will always attract funding from Europe or America. It's a prestigious position for you to have a European funding to conduct research. Now that research works for the Europeans more than it works for us. So that's the second bottleneck for me, that we need to start winning ourselves off that kind of relationship. We need to develop a relationship that we know, AU, for instance, or the SADC, we can have funding that is sufficient for us to drive these mandates. Otherwise, it just becomes so sluggish, even for the researchers to want to carry out that money, because funding is always the issue. And the third one that I will mention is the mainstream diseases like your HIV, TB, malaria. Those get more funding than other researchers. But then, you know, I don't know the status of vaccine development, for example, as far as HIV is concerned, but I know there's work that is happening in South Africa on malaria and HIV. So funding mostly is consumed by those. And this is not necessarily a point, but one of the things also that is that is said to be a problem is that due to these mainstream diseases being funded, developing the capacity or the vaccine, certain vaccines, it will be expensive. But for me, yes, it will be expensive because it will serve, apparently, it will serve a small number of people. But then that is not the view from the other world or countries. When they develop vaccines for us, they are in their minds, they are looking at us as a huge population that is likely to struggle to get to the public health care. So therefore, they will need the vaccines. But then with us, we are trying to look at it like, we don't have the appetite for it. That is a myth. We do need to develop that. We have a huge appetite and a huge market that can work for us.
So what role do you think AU or the various, you know, committees within AU to actually actively drive a process towards self-sufficiency as the continent?
AU does work with number of agencies that are critical to that, like NEPAD and others. But I think as AISA, we are going to embark on a project that we will be looking at active players within the science, technology, and innovation strategy of Africa, because we want to identify how far is the implementation of this DISA, and secondly, the players, are they meeting the objectives, or what are the bottlenecks as well, so that we can have an understanding of that. So I cannot give a definite answer, but what I think AU needs to do, AU needs to strengthen that implementation and cooperation or collaboration. But that may also be a challenge because, people move and so on, and then there's no a thorough follow through of implementation. But I do think that we need to make sure that the ministries can drive that and assist the African Union to make sure that we can develop that.
Now, South Africa is currently, or our president is currently chairing the AU, all right? What can he do to actually advance this as maybe part of his legacy, when there is a change in the chairmanship? At least you find that there's some impetus that has already been, given by the time he leaves office as a chair.
Great. I think about 3 weeks ago, he did mention that they are working on securing some funding for a vaccine. So I think that is a step number one, whether as the president of South Africa or chairing the AU, that's step number one that any other president within the continent needs to do. Secondly, as him chairing the AU and leaving the legacy, there is an African pharmaceutical manufacturing strategy there at the AU. I think it would be worthwhile for the president or the chairperson of the AU to look into that and try and find out where the bottlenecks are, and ensure that there is a binding contract within the countries that already have the capacity to manufacture or to develop these essential medicines, and bring it down. So develop a structure of some sort that will say, in West Africa, for example, either Nigeria or Senegal, they need to make sure that they can solidify that. In South Africa, working maybe with Mozambique or Zimbabwe, whichever they can. So we need to have a serious structure that he can leave as part of his legacy. Also, part to that, countries must commit some funding to make sure that the strategies can be mobilized.
But then, when you look at a number of African countries, they are actually struggling in terms of their healthcare systems. A big part of their annual budgets are actually grants that they get, or from donors. They don't really generate much money from within their countries to drive their healthcare system. So don't you think that maybe that could also be a problem, that they've got very weak economies as such, that some of these things which are actually quite important may not be seen as priority because they are battling with the basics?
Definitely. These healthcare systems, much as they are a problem, but I do think a strategic collaboration would come in as handy. And as I'm saying, it does not need to be all these African countries that come on board. So now we need to identify the countries that have that kind of strength, identify the countries that think they can be able to mobilize their funding or finance institutions to feed into that manufacturing. It will take years. It's not going to be something that will really take a few months to happen. It will take years. But I think what is important at this point in time, it is to solidify the implementation and the strategy, and to say, this is the plan that we will measure after however number of months. that is most important. Yes, at this point in time, we do not have a saving grace as far as our health systems are concerned, or health institutions are concerned. It's going to be a serious mess, and also because of poverty, because of malnutrition. So it will take time. So I do think that making sure that these countries that we have agreements with, we can probably strike an agreement of some sort. And I think China has indicated that they are willing to bring in some of their vaccines, but then that also still perpetuates the mindset of dependency. So that is my problem, that we need to make sure that even though we do get assistance of some sort to respond to COVID, we are not wanting to build this capacity just to respond to COVID. This must be for sustainability. This must be for resilience, you know.
Yes. Now, there is something that you mentioned there in your article about skills loss, about 40% of the skills that are being lost to the finance sector, where you were talking about biomedical science skills and the fact that that might affect the achievement of the objectives of the Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa 2024.
Yes. There is a if I don't remember the article, I mean the document per se, but then it's one of the SADC documents, or the AU Observatory for Science, Technology and Innovation. When you look at Africa, we are so rich in these biological sciences, medicines, you know, all that fraternity, public health, and so on. We are so rich in producing those skills. And unfortunately, those skills do not serve us because they are lost. So as a result, one of the most mismatched skills is the biomedical sciences. I think it's one of it's on the top 5 of the skills that are mismatched because they are simply lost. They are not being absorbed. So now for me, it also tells me that as much as we are producing, even when you go to the Department of Higher Education's DHET documents, as far as the numbers of the graduates, they are mostly in the public health, biological health sciences, and the STEMs. But then they are being lost. So for me, it's a problem that I don't think we have looked at these skills as very much necessary. And also by the virtue that we have the Cubans coming into the country. There's nothing wrong with Cubans coming into the country. But then everybody has been asking, so we have unemployed nurses. How come so and so on is unemployed, and so on? So it's a challenge. It means we are not taking care of our stock. We are not making sure that our stock is properly absorbed, or we are overproducing.
Yes.
So probably we are overproducing, and we don't want to be clear about being overproducing of these skills, or we are producing them, but they're not having plans to absorb them, or to make sure that they can be used.
You know, this past week, I was approached by some young person who's got a BSc in biomedical sciences. And this lady has not been able to secure a job, you know, that is relevant to what she has studied. And she's ended up having to go and work in other, you know, industries that are not really relevant to her. She's passionate about lab work and all of that. However, she's unable to get an opportunity in that area. So the mismatch, therefore, of the skills that are being produced by the universities that get frustrated once they are done with their qualifications, and we don't have relevant industries that should actually be making use of those skills. So how much collaboration should there be between private sector, you know, that employs people, and the universities that produce the skills, so that they produce skills that are in demand by the industry?
So this skill it's a skill that is in demand. I've known it to be an in-demand skill, but then of course it ends up being mismatched or lost, which is sad. So now, now to answer your question, Even myself, when I was completing my doctorate, it was daunting that, it's very difficult to get a job. So you're either going to end up being a postdoc or you're going to a research council. But also what became apparent for me was that we need some entrepreneurial skills. So we either need to start that breeding. I mean, Ramaphosa, in the beginning of his presidency, he mentioned that we need to incorporate entrepreneurial skills in education. People, learners or graduates must be taught how to be entrepreneurial. And I think it's very good, and we need to see it because this company now, there is the Cape Biotech, the one that is going to produce a faster testing, a PCR in June or July. I mean, like, we need such kinds of mentality, but then we also can't have about hundreds and thousands of companies that are being started by masters or BS or doctorates. But then we need to make sure that we can have enough of them to make sure that they can be absorbed. And also, I think we are also inward looking more than outward looking. People, I don't think they think about testing or needing the biomedical scientist as something that is critical, because how often do you get sick? Or if you get sick, you just go to a GP. There's no understanding of what happens behind the scenes. There's no understanding of there's a person who is testing. There's no understanding of there's a person who needs to purify a drug or an antigen or so on. So it requires multiple skills to be there. But then I think we just don't think as far as that. So that is something that we need to put in mind, that even when we study these degrees, let us be open-minded in terms of, I'm going to study this degree with what in mind? I want to get into the laboratory. I mean, like, there are private laboratories that are small, but then we need to understand how can I open my own laboratory? What are the requirements? Because I'll tell you what, from the research that I have conducted so far, on this subject, and taking it back to BSc graduate, there is we are missing out a lot on just understanding the good manufacturing practices, skills, good clinical practice skills, the skills, not even running those manufacturing units, but just having that skill of understanding. And I think if we can educate ourselves, even on the regulatory, we would have done ourselves a great deal as far as moving this agenda forward. One of their colleagues that they're also producing some enzymes, and he said to me, you know what, Palesa, we produce most of these enzymes for reactions, but we are struggling with regulatory. Could you please assist us with understanding the regulatory environment and the framework? Not that I understand it myself much, but then I also got to hear it from somebody who is developing these ingredients that they're struggling with it. So those are some of the issues that we need to understand. So we don't only want to think that the ultimate destination is being in the laboratory, but then unpacking the whole chain of what is happening.
Now, about 2 weeks ago, I hosted one of the leading scientists in the IKS place, Dr. Onk Shabalala, who is part of the Department of Science and Technology, or Science and Innovation. And there's some great work that they are doing there, making use of, young South Africans, trying to encourage them to actually, have interest in research and all of that. And I think, as a country, we need to have more of such. And 2 weeks before then, I had spoken to Professor Matsabisa from University of Free State. And he's also doing great work there. So I think these, units, should actually work much closer and also try and absorb some of these kids who have interest in research, because it really is paining to see young people who have degrees, but they don't seem to really have any opportunities to actually advance, you know, and they even worry, if I go further and get my honors, get my masters, won't I be overqualified for the market and things like those. But anyway, coming back to the topic of today, what do you think is the role of public-private partnerships, seeing that the issue of funding is a challenge and the government may not have enough money? So getting government and private sector to actually work on a clear strategy of, you know, helping the country to develop the capacity necessary so that in 10, 20 years from now, at least we are not where we are now.
You know, I think these institutions, when they work with government, and not necessarily that I'm taking the side of government, but I think we should have a development in our minds to say, okay, our role as much as is to attract profit, but also our role is to build a nation, it's to build economy, because when the economy collapses, it affects all of us. You know, maybe when it's being rebuilt, only few may benefit, but eventually a majority of us will benefit. So I think they need to have that in mind. That is their first role. Secondly, their role is not only to be subsidized by governments, but then their role as well is to make sure that they can partner with young entrepreneurs or small businesses that can feed into their business development, that can also benefit from some of the profit that they can make. So it must be a system that is interlinked. It does not only benefit just the private or the government, but then it can have means that it can extend itself to social, taking care of some social responsibilities through small companies.
Yeah. So as we wrap up our discussion, you know, we've been largely, you know, talking in a way that is almost disappointing, you know, when we look at everything. Is there any positives that you would like to point out, you know, towards what we would like to see?
Okay, so yeah, I don't think it was necessarily to speak negatively. So my points were to say these are the challenges that present themselves as opportunities. So that is my main message, to say, look, here are the loopholes. These loopholes are waiting for us to exploit and take as opportunities for us to build on. You know, because unfortunately, we are not going to find things ready-made for us. We need to make them for ourselves, you know. So I think that is that. And I think as much as I'm talking about capacity, for me, that is a positive. We do have that capacity. It is there. So we must not think that we cannot do it. It is difficult or what. Every time we're trying to think of building our states or our nations, we are thinking money. But then it's about making use of what we already have. We do have those resources. It does not make sense that at this day and age, we still suffer from brain drainage. I'm certain that most of those vaccines that will come from Europe or China, or maybe not China, but Europe, there will be Africans that are playing a role in making sure that they're being developed. You know, so for me, it's a positive that we do have those skills. We just need to have an objective that is clear as we are engaging on this project. We need to move away from hoarding some of these entitlements as professors or doctors that are participating in a particular project to develop something. We need to move forward in terms of how does this build a nation? How does it build a country? How does it build our economy? Because oftentimes one of my irritations is that we want to treat those that are less fortunate, that we call the poor, as our subject, you know, that advance our research. But then we also want to move. We need to move away from thinking of the poor in the mind, but then we need to think of inclusive development that all of us can participate in and build.
Now, we often hear about the need for the decolonization of the mind. Do you think we are not making a lot of progress towards self-sufficiency because maybe we are not yet decolonized in our minds?
Yes, we are. Yeah, that is a. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of countries in the continent, they still have very close ties with their former colonizers. You know, we talk about Francophone countries, we talk about Anglophone countries, and some countries can't do anything until they hear, you know, from their former colonizers, you know. So that's why I'm asking you about whether there is a need, because we often talk about African solutions for African problems. So here we are talking about 69% of the disease burden being infectious diseases. And so we should be developing own solutions to actually make sure that we use that capacity that is there. We collaborate, like you were saying, we try and mobilize resources and fund these, the interventions.
Definitely, no, we need to decolonize this, especially I think the biomedical sciences is one aspect that needs decolonizing more than ever. And besides this topic, as you may have seen, that it's becoming apparent that even the sciences that we think they're being conducted in good faith, they are also having some sort of sour taste in our minds or in our palates, and we need to decolonize that. Shortly, one of the articles that I came across this evening as I was doing a bit of reading, I was so shocked that there was an article that says, I will paraphrase, but it's about Tanzanian women who are working in restaurants, bars, and so on in that food chain. Should they form part of some trial of some sort? So, and I was so shocked that a paper like that is published. You know, trying to say, if you're a woman and you're working at the restaurant or a pub, you're most likely to have HIV. Therefore, you must be used for clinical trials of whatever drug that they want to look into. So we do need to decolonize that, and we need to make sure that we stop believing a lot in just taking medication, but then because we are serving the other continents, their economies are flourishing because of our sicknesses, you know. We need to make sure that we can do a better work as far as decolonizing and understanding how we can manage infections and diseases from a decolonized point of view.
So what are your parting shots or the words that you just want to, of maybe encouragement or pricking people's consciences, you know, about the need to focus on this area?
So I think what I want to say is that, look, we have done tremendous work to date. I am certainly proud of, as a South African, as an African, I think we have done a tremendous work. And we need not shy away from that. What is important also, we need to make sure that we remove institutions in our minds. We make sure that we are not afraid to collaborate. We are not afraid to train, because we also need to make sure that we train a cadre that can think in a particular form. Not only the cadre that will be absorbed for manufacturing the medications for us, but then the one that will say, as much as we have a Agenda 2063, for example, be active participants in making sure that we drive that in our small corners. So in my parting ways, I am saying that we are in good hands. We will win this battle eventually. Let us just drop some of the things that are slowing us down.
Yes. So are you optimistic about the future in terms of addressing this issue?
I'm very much optimistic. I will not stop hitting the nail for where we are going wrong, but I'm also not going to say we are not capable of winning this. I think we are very much capable, and we need to believe and do that.
So institutions like yours, which is the Human Science Research Council, how capacitated are they, to drive this agenda?
Well, it's well capacitated. There are certain issues, of course, in terms of, we do a lot of training, and then sometimes we are able to carry over, sometimes we are not able to carry over, but then we are well capacitated. I think in the beginning of the COVID, if you remember, HRC was right there conducting the surveys, trying to get
the social study, yes.
Yes, trying to get the country to understand what the issues are. And even in yesterday's tobacco judgment, one of the judges made use of our survey there. But all I'm trying to say is that, look, we could probably do better with other new ideas that can that the public can assist us with. Sometimes we are not aware of certain issues, and we rely on the public to make us aware of. So we rely a lot on engagements. Capacity is there. We need more of it. And I'm sure we will be able to work with within South Africa and outside.
Yeah. All right, Naga Sikejane, Palisa, meaning the flower. Thank you very much for availing yourself. I had asked for 45 minutes. I've gone over by about 10 minutes. So I want to thank you for, affording us your time at short notice. It's been a very, eye-opening kind of discussion for me. And I'm sure it's not the last time I'm inviting you here. So, and I'm also hoping that the viewers who logged in were able to follow the discussion and learn a thing or two, so that those kids out there who want to follow a career in research, they can see that there is a need in the areas that we're talking about today, and not get discouraged and change course, and do other courses that were not necessarily their first choice. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank all our viewers for joining us.
Thank you very much. Good night to you, and good night to your viewers.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
Thank you.